Welcome to the Daily Word, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study the book of Romans. Keep in mind, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible. So if you're using a different translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. Now, before we get back to our study, keep in mind, or don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button on Facebook and on for you YouTube viewers. Hit like and subscribe, and if you want to add a comment or question, feel free to do so. Also hit the bell to be notified of any future studies that we will be doing. Okay, we are in verse 21, and this is we're continuing on that God's wrath. Remember, the just shall live by faith. Paul said that the gospel is God's power to save, because the gospel reveals God's righteousness. But then he goes on and says, for the wrath of God is revealed against godless people. And that's important. In other words, no one is innocent in that they don't know what's going on. They're just living their good life, maybe in the nice suburbs, they kind of, and all of a sudden the wrath of God is happening. Why? Well, he says, notice, the wrath of God is revealed against godless people who suppress the truth. Now, what truth are they suppressing? Well, even the creation reveals the divine nature of God. This is what they're suppressing. So, for example, an atheist can look at creation and go, no, God created this. He's suppressing the truth, or they are suppressing the truth. And by the way, atheists is a very large, growing number of people. And that's kind of two segments of population that's growing in the day. People who consider themselves non-religious, and then there are people who are also atheists. They're growing and rising in numbers. Okay? Why? In a sense, notice he says the godlessness. In other words, they reject God, but they're suppressing the truth. The guilt here is they're not open to truth. You can look at it and go, I'm rejecting it. That's the sin. Not that they don't fully comprehend or don't know. Maybe even an agnostic who may go, I just don't know if there's a God or not. By the way, there can be very good reasons for that. Many, many poor churches who present the gospel poorly. They don't know themselves. But notice what Paul is saying here. You can look at the creation and recognize the divine nature of God. But if you look at that nature, and of course even the truth, and you reject it, you suppress it, you push it away, that's what the wrath of God is you're going to face the wrath of God on that basis. So then in verse 21, he says, for though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became nonsense, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, four-footed beasts, four-footed animals, and reptiles. Now, what is he saying here? God, even though they knew God, and there was a time, like I say, one of the growest segments here is atheists and agnostics, or people who consider themselves non-religious. They're one of the fastest growing people segments here. Okay, but it's going to come a time when I don't even think atheism is going to be an issue. It's really not, because again, they're suppressing the truth. And again, for example, the judgment, when God judged in the book of Revelations, you see the tribulation period. Atheism is not the factor. They don't care. They're cursing God to his face. Even when the wrath is being poured out through the judgments on the earth, they're cursing God. They're not going, what is going on here? What God is doing this? No, God, they're sticking their fist at God. And notice he says right here, when they knew God, they didn't glorify him as God. Now, one of the most baffling mysteries to me is when Adam sinned. because Adam didn't have a sin nature. There was no sin. Life was perfect for him. Literally perfect. He literally had the world, right? He had the most beautiful woman in the world. Of course, she was the only woman. But life was perfect for them, right? Perfect climate. They didn't have to labor for stuff. Fruit, the trees, everything, right? The scenery, perfect. And he sinned. So that's baffling to me. Now, when we come to Cain and Abel, his sons, Cain knew God, but he didn't glorify him as God. Cain tried to offer God what he wanted God to have. But because he was godless, because he was unrighteous, he suppressed the truth. God says, hey, I'm not accepting your offering. And instead of Cain humbling himself before God and saying, well, God, what would you have me? You have people doing the same thing today, right? Here's my religion. They go and start entire religions. That's baffling to me. Because if you reject the Bible, why would you then start a religion? If you have to make up a religion, make up a God, make up practice, it's not a religion. It's not a God. Our God is the one we worship, not the other way around. But that's what Cain did. He tried to force God to take what he wanted God to have. And when God rejected him, what did he do? He suppressed the truth. God told him. And by the way, it wasn't the issue of him not knowing God. God said to him, "Hey, why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, won't you be accepted?" He rejected that. He suppressed the truth. And of course, he goes on to murder his brother. And so he says right here, when they knew God, they didn't glorify him as God or show gratitude, but their thinking became nonsense. And what happens? They went from bad to worse. That's why I said, especially in pagan religions, you begin to worship things, right, instead of the Creator. So then he says in verse 24, therefore God delivered them over to cravings of their hearts, to sexual impurity, so that their bodies were degraded among themselves. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worship and serve something created instead of the Creator who is praised forever and ever. Notice what he says right here. It's very important. And we get to the sexual things in a moment, and probably in the next video in verse 26. He mentions it here, but he says they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. That's important right there. On YouTube, I can see a lot of people who are ex-Christians, right? They've left the faith. And oftentimes, they either become atheists, okay, but oftentimes, they follow some other religion. And I'm just thinking to myself, you exchange the truth for a lie. You start following a lie. And as a result of that, then he says, you begin to worship and serve the creature, the created thing, instead of the Creator. Now, in our days, a lot of times that shows up in the form of ideologies, rival beliefs, atheism. Okay? In other words, we're not bowing down to carved images, but how about ideologies? There is no God. Or, guess what? The God that I serve is this way. Hey, the God that I serve accepts its inclusion. Whatever you want, right? A couple of stars that they have wealth, and but they have built churches on their massive palatial grounds. And of course, you can come and worship God or worship whatever you want. As I said, if you have to fill in all the blanks, if you have to make up a God and fill in all the blanks, it's not a God. And so they built these structures on their lands, their own church, that they're saying, well, whatever you want to worship. Why not just worship? Anyway, that's what he says right here, by the way. He says they become senseless in doing that. They become senseless in doing that. All right, I'll pick it up with verse 26 in the next video, so I'll see you then.